Okay guys, we are back on for part 2 of the hip mobility episodes. This episode we're going to show you the exercises that you can use to actually improve your movement. Last episode was more about the passive side, which I do believe has a place. Obviously that's why I put them in that first episode. When we want to sort of manage our resting tension, if we have something that sort of spikes our resting tension, a big day on the bike, a big training session, sitting in a van for hours and hours, having like a little routine of those sort of more passive end range hold stretches to sort of bring that back down to our normal level of resting tension, super valuable. Today we're talking about movement, motor control. Can we actually move into and out of these positions under load? That's what I care about more so than seeing someone being able to hold a pigeon stretch, okay? The movement side is where those tangible benefits begin to sort of play out on the dirt bike. Can we actually control our hips and move in and out of these positions? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Think about when we're standing on the dirt bike. Any good coach is going to tell you they want you to be on the balls of your feet. Those toes are going to be in nice and tight on the bike. When the toes are in, it means the knees are in. When the toes are out, the hips externally rotated means the knees are going away from the bike, right? So we want those toes in, the knees are going to be in. What that means is the hip needs to be in a little bit of an internally rotated position. So we want to be training that. Again, people are not necessarily limited by the mobility component here. They're limited by the ability to control it, for the brain to actually control this range of motion. So some simple exercises that we can use. One's a very simple one, 90-90 knee rolls with a foam roller in between our knees. So we just want to be mindful here that we're not compensating and just sort of moving it with our lower back and our rib cage, like just pushing it. We want to really slow it down, and you should feel your adductors light up here. The adductors play a huge role as an internal rotator for the hip. So you should feel your adductors are lighting up. And if you're new to this exercise, new to this range of motion, or maybe you're a little bit weak in the adductors, you could actually experience some cramping just from this simple 90-90 knee roll. So we want to be able to get comfortable. Over time, once you get stronger with some of these other exercises I'll show you, you should feel that this skill improves, like just being able to actually use your adductors to move the pelvis in and out of rotation. Again, simple drill, good bang for buck. B stance RDL. So most people, when they do a single leg RDL, very popular exercise in the moto world, people love it for balance and functional hip stability. Most people, when they do a single leg RDL, they just flare out. They lack the ability to control and internally rotate the pelvis, so they dump into external rotation and they just open up and they actually move away from that lead leg. So this is why I love the B stance variation. Is it teaches us to keep our weight stacked over that front leg and get that pelvis to internally rotate, which again, it's adductors. The adductors sort of pulling the pelvis around and the glute lengthening. So the glute has to lengthen to allow that pelvis to sort of internally rotate over the top of the femur. So again, when I get down to the bottom here and I'm in this reach, I can feel that stretch in my glute. I'm stacked over this front leg. If I took that back foot off the ground, I'd be able to maintain my position because I've got 90% of my weight is on that front leg. Again, it's a skill. Most people can't do it. So nice, simple exercise that we can deploy that will, again, it's focus of improving the hip mobility. It's not going to be as loadable as a bilateral RDL, but that's not really the point at this stage. We're looking to be able to improve our motor control and improve that hip mobility. Then we would have something like a front foot elevated split squat, where same sort of, train of thought is that we are keeping our center of mass stacked over that front foot and sort of rotating in toward that lead leg. Again, very common that most people, when they split squat, they will open up away from the lead leg and they will actually shift back, put a lot more load through the rear leg and lack that sort of internal rotation of the pelvis and the lengthening of the glute. So any of these unilateral exercises, we want to be biasing as much load as we can to the front leg, which means we want to get that pelvis to sort of internally rotate a little bit and get that glute to lengthen. So these are just a couple of simple exercises that, with a couple of cues, that can help you achieve those goals. Then of course, as we progress and we get better at these skills, like being able to control these movements, then we can layer the load on. Like we can actually load these split squats up pretty heavy. We can actually load a B stance RDL up with a landmine pretty freaking heavy. So to be able to do that and execute the movement well and get place the tension in the muscles that are actually looking to get the tension in, we need to be able to control those movements. So that's why these are good sort of stepping stones to learn the movement, get a feel for what we're actually trying to feel. And once we've got that dialed, then we can be like, okay, let's load these things up. We're going to get after it a little bit now. So then the next one would be frontal plane. So again, we're hitting the adductors here. There's heaps of different exercises you could probably put in the mix for adductors. My favorite is just a Copenhagen dip, short lever with the knee on the bench. I love this for the obvious fact that we're hitting the adductors and the hip. It's also getting the rib cage, like getting that rib cage to expand in that sort of frontal plane, which most people are really locked up and tight in the rib cage. So we want that rib cage to be able to move and expand. So very, very simple exercise, very good bang for buck exercise, which targets the adductors and also has that little sort of added side benefit of the rib cage and core mobility in there as well. Real simple bilateral exercises, which means two legs. Very simply, we want to be training through a full range of motion. So something like a bilateral RDL, we want to be getting a nice deep amount of hip flexion there. So this is going to be a little bit different person to person, going to come down to how long your hamstrings are essentially. An RDL is basically a mobility exercise for the hamstrings. Like we are lengthening the hamstrings. So if you focus on actually moving into that full range of motion and getting a good stretch through the posterior chain, not only are you going to be getting into deep hip flexion, you are also going to be lengthening the hamstrings over time. Then very simply is a squat. We want to be squatting to a full range of motion. So most people, very common when they squat with a barbell and they sort of get that load, they load it up, which is a good thing. We want to be getting nice and strong. What tends to happen is they sacrifice range of motion. So they will not squat very deep. So for us to be able to squat really deep, we need to be able to achieve full hip flexion. So the glutes need to be able to lengthen fully to be able to achieve a full depth squat. So a full depth squat is essentially like a mobility exercise for the hips. Like we are lengthening those glutes fully when we squat through full range of motion. You can see one of my clients here, Billy, absolutely sinking these front squats. So we want to be including some variations in our program. If we know that when we squat heavy, we're cutting the range off a bit, then maybe we want to include some accessory exercises that take us through a full range of motion. That's why I personally prefer to front squat or Zercher squat, because I feel like that allows me to get a better range of motion. And that's really why most people struggle to squat deep, is not because they lack mobility, it's because they struggle to control their center of mass. So if you struggle to control your center of mass and balance over your midfoot, depending on where you have the weight, particularly like it tends to be harder for people with a barbell on their back, you're going to feel like you're limited to get full depth. So again, we want to be including exercises or variations that teach us to control our center of mass and allow us to get into these deeper ranges of motion, because that's where, again, the nervous system, the brain is having to control. So it's controlling our center of mass and allowing those muscles to lengthen, like the glutes as an example, and the quads in a full depth squat, and then producing force out of that position. A little bonus tip on the end would be velocity. So all of those exercises that I just sort of ran you through, they all happen very slowly, and most strength exercises do, because that's not the primary goal of a strength exercise isn't, when we're on sort of the strength end of the spectrum and we are looking to to get stronger, we're adding more weight, that means that the movement is slowing down. So it's very controlled and quite slow. And that's great, especially when we're learning. When we're trying to learn anything and the motor control to progress and improve the skill of a movement, slowing it down is the best and the easiest way to do that. That being said, once we can control these ranges of motion really well, we want to actually bring that speed up. Like, we want to be able to move in and out of these ranges with some velocity, with some speed of movement. So again, my go-to for these is a deep tier landing in a lunge position. You would have seen heaps of these on my Instagram and on my stories if you follow them. So very simple position, but we're just bringing that speed in. So we're jumping out. We don't have to jump high. We just want to get at the beginning. We're just looking for softness. We're not looking for maximal power here. We're not looking to get 2 foot off the ground, especially at the beginning. We can progress to more of the power end of the spectrum. Right now, we're looking at the beginning. When I give these to a client, we're looking to be able to control the hip and the knee in those deeper ranges of motion at a little bit of a faster velocity than we would in, say, just a normal split squat. So we're getting really good at just moving in and out of that position smoothly and fluidly. And what that sort of ends up doing, especially when we elevate the front foot, we're getting like into this deeper range of hip flexion, and we're doing it at a faster velocity. So the muscle, the glute, everything around the hip, it's having to lengthen and shorten very quickly. So it's almost like a little bit of a ballistic stretch almost for the hip. So that's just a few, I guess, bang for buck exercises there that I would include for my clients. That they're obviously strength exercises there, but when we want to sort of drill down on the mobility aspect a little bit and make sure we're actually getting the hips, the knees, etc., to move through a full range of motion, there's some of the sort of variations we would choose and some of the things that I would get my clients thinking about. Again, like I mentioned before, the key is, like, these exercises are just, when they're a little bit lighter and a little bit slower potentially, we're really just performing them to get a feel. We want to be learning to control the movements and learning what we're meant to be feeling, like which muscles am I meant to be feeling tension in. Once we've got that dialed, like, we want to start. We don't want to get stuck here just doing these exercises with little weights forever. We want to just do them long enough that we learn how to control these ranges of motion, and then the good training, like the real progress, comes from actually adding load to those exercises in those variations. How much load will depend on lots of different things, but we want to be like progressing them up and actually moving the needle with them to build strength in those ranges. So hopefully that helps. If you got any questions, drop a comment to this episode and we'll see you on the next one.